Sometimes, the most profound revolutions in our lives happen in silence. No fanfare, no grand speeches, just the quiet turning of a soul that has finally grown tired of noise. It begins as a whisper, barely noticeable. A soft tug at the edges of your consciousness that says, "You don't belong here anymore." Not because you're better, not because you're angry, but because you've outgrown the need to explain your value to those who never truly saw it. There comes a time in every life when the greatest act of courage is not fighting back, but walking away. We're taught that power lies in confrontation, in the bold expression of truth, in the defense of our position, in being heard. But what if true power lies in restraint, in knowing when to speak, and more importantly, when not to? There is an elegance in silence, a dignity in leaving without burning bridges or breaking things on your way out. A wisdom in realizing that closure is a luxury, not a necessity. Albert Einstein understood this, not only in science, but in life. He saw the universe as a place where silence carried as much meaning as motion, where absence could speak louder than presence, where what is unspoken is just as important as what is said. Think about it. How many times have you stayed too long in places where your soul was shrinking? In conversations that drained you, in relationships that clipped your wings, in rooms where your silence screams louder than your words ever could. You explained, you defended, you tried, again and again. But they weren't listening, not really. They were hearing your words, but not the pain underneath. They were watching your movements, but not the exhaustion behind your smile. And one day, you stopped. And not because you gave up, but because you finally understood. You are not here to be understood by those who refuse to see. You are here to protect your peace. There's a kind of liberation in choosing to walk away quietly. It doesn't mean you didn't care. It doesn't mean you didn't love. It means you chose not to waste your last ounce of energy proving something to someone who had already made up their mind. That's a different kind of strength. Not the kind that breaks walls, but the kind that builds boundaries. Albert Einstein left Nazi Germany in silence, not to make a point, but to preserve his soul. He didn't make noise on the way out. He simply refused to stay in a place that no longer reflected the values of his heart. That decision wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. That's the kind of leaving we're talking about. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. When you realize that your time, your energy, your presence are sacred, and you begin to treat them as such, you begin to understand that not everyone deserves access to you. Not every argument deserves your voice. Not every space deserves your light, because not everyone wants healing. Some are addicted to conflict. Some are committed to misunderstanding you. And no matter how gently you explain, no matter how deeply you care, they will twist your words into weapons and call your silence an attack. But silence, in its truest form, is never an act of war. It is an act of clarity, a stillness that says, "I no longer wish to participate in my own suffering." It's a return to the center, to the version of you that doesn't need applause to feel worthy, to the version of you that knows peace is louder than noise, presence is stronger than performance, and leaving quietly is sometimes the loudest act of self-love there is. We live in a culture that mistakes volume for truth, where people shout to be heard and argue to be right. But real wisdom doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it simply knows and acts accordingly. Einstein once said, "The monotony and solitude of a quiet life stimulates the creative mind." He wasn't glorifying isolation. He was pointing to the beauty of detaching from chaos, of creating space for clarity. And sometimes that clarity begins with a single step away. You don't need to prove your pain. You don't need to broadcast your boundaries. You don't need to justify your decision to leave. You can just go, softly, intentionally, completely, because walking away isn't about making a statement. It's about reclaiming your silence, and with it, your sanity. The truth is, not every chapter deserves a dramatic ending. Some just need to be closed with grace, with a deep breath, and a quiet goodbye. This isn't about running away from your problems. It's about rising above them. It's about understanding that the path to peace often wins through uncomfortable exits. But if you listen deeply, your soul will tell you when it's time. Time to leave the room where your voice has been muted. Time to step out of the cycle that drains your spirit. Time to stop watering dead things and start nourishing your own roots. And when that time comes, you'll know you won't need permission, you won't need applause. You'll just leave, silently, not because you're weak, but because you're finally strong enough to choose peace over performance. And in that moment, something extraordinary happens. You don't just walk away from something. You walk towards something, yourself, your truth, your life, and that is the most beautiful sound silence has ever made. Leaving silently is not just an act of walking away. It is the embodiment of a lesson carved through time, through pain, through realization. It is the gentle unfolding of truth that no longer demands to be shouted, because what is true does not beg to be heard. It simply exists, quiet, unmoving, undeniable. Albert Einstein, a name forever etched in the architecture of science, also walked among the ruins of human behavior. While the world knew him for his theories of relativity and quantum wonders, those close to him knew his deeper wisdom, one born not only of the stars, but of solitude. He understood something most don't, that silence is not emptiness. Silence is space, sacred, sovereign space, where the soul speaks when the world goes deaf. Einstein was no stranger to leaving, not in rebellion, but in reverence for the self. When fascism began to infect the soil of his homeland, he did not scream. He did not curse the sky or the system. He simply chose to leave silently. A man of immense intellect, with the world watching, walked away without a spectacle. He understood that staying in a place where dignity was traded for ideology was a betrayal, not of the world, but of his own soul. And here lies the lesson. When you feel the ground shifting beneath you, when your voice is drowned by walls that only echo themselves, when your presence is tolerated but never treasured, that is when silence becomes your compass. Einstein's departure from Germany was not a political tactic. It was a moral necessity, a reminder that no matter how noble your intentions, there are moments in life where change does not come from pushing harder, but from pulling away, from choosing not to participate in what seeks to diminish you. In today's world, we glorify endurance. We teach people to hold on, to keep explaining, to be louder, to fight for space in the rooms that don't want them. But Einstein teaches a subtler, quieter courage, the courage to walk away without needing the last word, the bravery to let your actions, not your arguments, declare your worth, because there is nothing more painful than staying in a place where your presence is reduced to background noise, where your heart beats loudly, but your value is filtered through someone else's lens of indifference. You are not here to beg for kindness. You are not here to teach people how to love you properly. You are here to embody the truth of your worth, even if that means walking out of the room in silence, never to return. Einstein's life reveals that the most brilliant minds are often the most misunderstood. He was called eccentric, detached, even cold at times, but what many failed to see was a man who had mastered the art of inner stillness. He did not need to prove himself to the loud, chaotic world outside. His genius was not a performance. It was a reflection of the sanctuary he built within. In the same way, your peace is not performative. Your decision to walk away from noise, from hurt, from emptiness, that is not weakness. That is wisdom. The same wisdom Einstein carried not just in scientific journals, but in the quiet choices that defined his character. think of the countless times you've held your tongue when your heart wanted to scream. The moments you smiled to keep the peace while your soul was at war. The nights you stayed in places that chipped away at you just because leaving felt too loud. But what if leaving wasn't destruction? What if it was creation? What if your quiet eggs? It is the doorway to your rebirth. Einstein knew that stepping away from what no longer aligned with him wasn't abandonment. It was alignment with a higher principle. With integrity, with truth. He didn't leave to teach anyone a lesson. He left because he had already learned his. And so must we. We must learn that we are not obligated to remain where we are diminished. We are not required to explain ourselves repeatedly to those who only listen to reply, not to understand. We must understand that energy is sacred, and where we place it shapes the reality we live in. This isn't about ghosting. It's not about punishing others with your absence. It's about honoring the sacred contract you have with yourself to be truthful, to be whole, to be free. Sometimes that means saying goodbye without fanfare. Sometimes that means walking out without the need to be right. Sometimes that means trusting that the silence you leave behind will echo louder than any words you could have spoken. In Einstein's silence, there was an unshakable clarity, knowing that truth never needs to shout. That presence, when removed, often speaks volumes. We live in a world that thrives on noise, but noise is not clarity, attention is not love, and presence without peace is not connection. To leave silently is to declare, without a single word, that you are no longer available for relationships, environments, or systems that cost you your self-respect. It is to recognize that you do not have to participate in what poisons your spirit. And this is not a retreat. This is a return to yourself, to the part of you that remembers what joy feels like, what stillness tastes like, what it means to be in rooms where you don't have to shrink just to be accepted. Einstein's wisdom was not just in the laws of physics, but in the law of presence, the understanding that where you place your attention is where you place your life. So if you must go, then go, but let your silence be rooted in self-respect, not in spite. Let your leaving be an act of devotion to your peace, not rebellion against their chaos. Let it be quiet, let it be complete, and let it be holy, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Silence becomes sacred when it's born from understanding, not escape. And leaving silently is not the absence of love. It is the presence of deep wisdom. A wisdom that knows when a moment has served its purpose, when a space no longer welcomes growth, and when a person has stopped listening with their heart. The human soul is tender but not fragile. It bends, adapts, endures. It hopes beyond reason, forgives beyond logic. But even the most generous spirit eventually reaches a place of clarity, a threshold where pain no longer feels noble and staying no longer feels strong. In that space, a quiet voice rises from within, not angry, not bitter, just clear. It says, "You've given enough, it's time to go." This is not the voice of ego, it's the voice of self-respect. And in honoring that voice, you begin the slow, graceful process of returning to yourself. Too often, we confuse leaving with giving up. We're told to fight harder, love more, be patient, stay loyal. We think that turning away means we've failed. But what if turning away is not a failure of love, but an honoring of it? What if walking away is the most compassionate thing you can do, not only for yourself, but for others too? We grow up believing that endings must be loud, defined, dramatic, that closure must come wrapped in dialogue, explanation, mutual understanding. But life rarely offers that luxury. Most of the time, the endings that change us the most are the ones that arrive silently, like the last breath of a dream we no longer believe in. You feel it in the air, a heaviness that cannot be spoken. You feel it in your chest, a tiredness that rest can't fix. You feel it in your gut, that ancient knowing that you've stayed too long in a place that no longer sees you, and so you leave, not with blame, but with clarity. Not with resentment, but with release. Einstein's quiet departure from the darkness of his homeland was more than a physical move. It was a metaphysical shift, a choice to align with truth over comfort, inner peace over public approval. He didn't leave because he was weak. He left because he refused to let the weight of someone else's chaos collapse the integrity of his spirit. In your own life, there are people, places, and patterns that may feel familiar, but are no longer aligned with your truth. And the longer you stay, the more you begin to betray the whisper within you that says, "You deserve more than this." But leaving is hard, isn't it? Especially when nothing is overtly wrong, when there's no cruelty, just indifference. No drama, just distance, no breaking point, just the slow erosion of connection. You begin to question yourself. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I need to try harder. Maybe they didn't mean it. But beneath all the maybes is one undeniable truth. Your peace has become too expensive. The cost of staying has grown too heavy to bear. The space you occupy now demands that you shrink in ways your soul no longer agrees to. And so you gather the quiet courage to let go. You don't shout. You don't slam the door. You simply choose stillness over struggle. Because at some point, growth requires departure. The tree does not apologize for shedding its leaves. The river does not explain itself as it changes course. The sun does not ask permission to set. Nature understands what we often forget, that transformation often comes quietly, and leaving is a necessary part of becoming. To leave silently is to trust that not all truths need to be spoken to be known, that not all pain needs to be dissected to be valid, that not all endings require mutual understanding to be complete. It is the spiritual art of walking away with grace, because you finally remembered who you are. And when you do, the world changes, not because it has become different, but because you have. You begin to notice the spaces where your voice is welcomed, not tolerated. The people who listen to understand, not respond. The environments that nourish your inner life rather than drain it. You no longer beg for belonging. You become it. You no longer ask for love. You embody it. And in that shift, you discover something profound. Peace doesn't come from fixing what's broken. It comes from freeing what's bound. Einstein's silence was not withdrawal. It was wisdom in motion. His quiet exits were statements of alignment, not abandonment. He understood that life is too short to spend explaining your soul to those who cannot hear it. So you stop. You stop trying to be understood where understanding has never lived. You stop hoping for validation from those still wrestling with their own shadows. You stop watering deserts, waiting for flowers to bloom. And you begin again, not loudly, but quietly, with soft strength, with sacred stillness. The world may not notice your silent departures. It may not applaud your quiet boundaries, but the deepest parts of you will know. And that knowing is worth more than any external recognition, because at the end of the day, peace isn't a performance. It's a home, and sometimes, to find it, you must walk away from everything that taught you to live without it. So let them wonder why you left. Let them sit in silence. Let the echo of your absence speak louder than your words ever could. You don't owe the world a spectacle. You owe yourself a life, and that begins with a quiet decision. A soft surrender, a sacred exit. Just leave, silently, and watch as the noise fades, and the truth of who you are rises, undisturbed. Eventually, silence becomes not only a choice, but a language, a language only the soul understands. And once you begin to speak it fluently, something within you begins to heal, not in sudden bursts, but in slow, almost imperceptible waves. The noise fades, the inner storms calm, and you begin to remember what peace felt like before you had to fight so hard to keep it. This is the quiet power of leaving, not with fury, but with grace, not with accusation, but with acceptance, because there comes a point when you no longer need to change the ending. You simply need to choose a new beginning. Albert Einstein did not just leave a country, he left a mindset. He stepped away from a world unraveling in fear and hatred and into one where his values could breathe again. He did not wait to be thanked. He did not plead to be understood. He simply honored the deeper voice within him, the one that knew silence was the highest form of strength in that moment. And now, you stand at the edge of your own quiet choice. Maybe it's not a nation you're walking away from. Maybe it's a friendship that quietly turned cold. Maybe it's a job that slowly drains the light from your eyes. Maybe it's a version of yourself that no longer fits who you're becoming. Whatever it is, you've come to understand that staying would be the true betrayal. Not because you're quitting, but because you're finally listening to that inner wisdom that no longer wants to explain, defend, or delay. You see, life doesn't always ask us to conquer. Sometimes it asks us to release it, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Not because we're running away, but because we finally have the clarity to know what we will no longer carry. Letting go silently is an act of trust. Trust that what is meant for you will not require force, that what is sacred will not ask you to shrink, that what is real will never demand your suffering as proof of your devotion. You begin to realize that not everything needs to be resolved. Some things are meant to remain unfinished, unanswered, and open-ended, like the final pages of a story that no longer belongs to you, and that's okay. Closure is not always a conversation. Sometimes, it's a quiet choice you make in the privacy of your own heart, to stop returning to places that hurt, to stop seeking healing where the wound began. Einstein once said, "A calm and modest life brings more happiness than the pursuit of success combined with constant restlessness." He wasn't just referring to material success. He was pointing to the exhausting pursuit of proving your worth, of staying in relationships for fear of loneliness, of explaining your choices until your voice is hoarse. He knew that happiness wasn't found in applause, but in alignment, in living a life that made sense to your soul, even if it confused the world. And that is the essence of leaving silently. It is a return to that calm, to that modest internal life that needs no validation to feel whole. It is the quiet revolution of no longer needing to be understood in order to feel free. You walk away, not because they were wrong and you were right, but because the story has finished telling you what it was meant to teach. And in that final, silent step, you reclaim all the parts of yourself you gave away in the name of being chosen, accepted, or kept. You take your voice back, even if you never raise it. You take your energy back, even if they never notice. You take your life back, not loudly, but completely. And then, something beautiful happens. You begin to create again. Not just projects, but presence. Not just plans, but peace. Not just goals, but grace. Because silence, when it is chosen, becomes the soil in which your next chapter begins to bloom. And this time, the roots are deeper. This time, the growth is gentler. This time, you are not seeking to be heard. You are simply seeking to be whole. We often think wisdom is about knowing more, speaking more, doing more. But often, it's the opposite. It's knowing when to stop, knowing when your part in someone's story has ended, knowing when your energy is better spent elsewhere, knowing when to walk away with your dignity still intact. Einstein's life reminds us that brilliance doesn't shine by overpowering others. It shines by staying true to itself. And sometimes that means stepping away from the noise of the world so that the silence inside can be heard again. You don't need to justify your decision. You don't need to unpack the reasons why. Let those remain unspoken, held gently in your heart. This is not about creating distance out of anger, it's about choosing space out of love. Love for yourself, love for your peace, love for the life you are building quietly, away from the chaos you once thought you needed. And maybe, one day, those who never understood your silence will hear its message. And not through your words, but through your transformation, through the light you carry, through the calm in your presence, through the joy you no longer need to explain. Because the truth is, the people who are meant to walk with you will never require you to lose yourself to stay. They will never force you to choose between their comfort and your peace. They will not fear your silence. They will honor it. They will understand that sometimes silence is not a wall, it's a doorway. A passage into deeper knowing, deeper love, deeper life. And so you leave, not to escape, not to punish, but to begin again. And in your silent exit, you do something extraordinary. You remind the world, without saying a word, that the most powerful departures are the ones made not in rage, but in reverence, not in resistance, but in return, not in weakness, but in wisdom. Just leave, silently, and watch how the world begins to shift, not because you changed it, but because you finally remembered that you could change yourself.